that brings us to the end of our formal presentations. So we're going to move into the panel discussion now. So I'd ask the speakers that are in the room here to come up to the podium and sit on one of the chairs here, please. And while they're doing that, I would like to welcome Marc Cornelissen, who's joining us here from the Plans for the Future European Technology Platform. And Marc is also, in his other, apart from working with the Plans for the Future Technology Platform, he works at present for BASF, but he's a long track record of working in crop research and development over a number of organisations. So look, you've been very patient as an audience, both virtual and real here. I'm sure you have lots of questions. So before we get into the panel discussion, we'd like to give you the opportunity to ask some of the presenters this morning some specific questions. So if you can just maybe raise your hand if you have a question. We will also go to our virtual audience and take some of the questions that have come in through the chat function. So we'll alternate between the room and virtual. So we have a question down here on the left. You might just state your name and organisation.
Yes, my name is I'm working for the Joint Research Center and the Knowledge Service Commission. I have a question, comment to several of the speakers, but maybe primarily to Sandrine. Well, my first question is about whether the life cycle assessment, the carbon analysis, what we used to do in the past is not a little bit overhauled, whether we should not focus when looking into energy or proteins, whether we should not look at the balance, which takes also in consideration practices on the farm of storing energy in the system. I think that's would be useful, and maybe in this context, pig production, as it is practiced today, would also maybe do not shine anymore like so bright that we can say everything is ecological or beneficial for our environment. So that's one question. The second question goes to DG Agri, whether it is not time to look into an assessment methodology for evaluating our practices in Europe, which also includes ecological footprint, meaning taking into consideration aspects of environmental services delivered by our people in the rural area which do production there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we'll go to Sandrine first and then Wolfgang. And if I could ask you keep your responses as brief as possible because we have lots of speakers. We also, by the way, just to remind the audience, we have our virtual speakers are here. So if you wish to ask them questions, you can as well. So Sandrine first.
Yes. I think life cycle assessment is not the only answer to measure the environmental assessment, but I think it's part of the measurement. So I agree with you that in life cycle assessment, you don't see the recycling part, you don't see the territory level, so it has to be completed. But it doesn't mean that if we want to look at the territory level on the recycling part of the energy of the protein consumption, it doesn't mean that we have to forget the efficiency of the system, because I think it will be a problem too. So life cycle assessment is not all, but I think it's part of the assessment, and it says us interesting things too.
Thank you. And Wolfgang?
Thank you very much. Maybe just also on this question here, which we often discuss also in our services. I think on the one hand, there is this life cycle assessment with respect to efficiency and even environmental sustainability. But rightly or wrongly, we are also faced with societal demands and perceptions, in particular in the pig sector. And we can have a perfect scientific reply as long as the acceptance in society is not there, it will not help us. And here comes in the point that you have referred to on the animal welfare. I think you have very well shown the, if you so want, disadvantages of organic farming in a life cycle logic. But what is more important? That the pig is walking outside and has fresh air and might spread nutrients, but society will say, listen, this is a happy pig, alm pig and all that stuff you have. So how do we balance even within our sustainability objectives? What is more important, the animal welfare or the ecological footprint? And I must say I'm almost shocked if I see some organizations complaining now that the eco schemes which we are proposing are also for animal welfare, because that takes away the money from the ecological footprint. I mean, as if animal welfare is not also something that is hugely important for sustainability. Sorry, just on this point. The second point, I think you are entirely right, and this is what I wanted just to say. We have just published, I think, a study on the ecological benefit of the Common Agricultural Policy 2014-2019. But if I would be an innocent reader and I would look at figures, so how many pollinators more, how many butterflies more, how many nutrients less, we are not really able to quantify all these things. And this is what is expected from the outside world, from the society. I give you an example. If you look at our evaluation reports, which are well done, and I'm not complaining about it, but it's not enough. We know exactly on how many million square hectares we have agri-environmental management. On one of these practices is that we mow the grass only as of, I do not know, 15th July, to ensure that there is spreading of the, how do you say, the salmon, this dissemination, and that the wild birds can survive in their nests. So we know exactly on how many square kilometers or square hectares we do it. So it should be possible to find out what is the difference in terms of diversity of plants on such a field compared to a field where this is not done. And then I should be able to say this. But do we have this evidence? We have always nothing. So we need really to get into this, because the future of the Common Agricultural Policy will be about delivering public goods. If you listen to all these people, they are asking for public goods. And we say, yeah, don't worry, we contribute to biodiversity. They all want facts and figures. And that will be our challenge in the future.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. That's certainly a challenge for those of us in the research community to provide that evidence. So next question, I'm going to go to the virtual community, and after this question, because Marc wasn't a presenter here this morning, I might ask you, Marc, to come in with your perspectives on what you've heard here this morning, just briefly after this question, okay? So you can be preparing your thoughts.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
So maybe I'm going to ask 2 questions because for different, and then one general, and then you will apply. So one specific for Anton from Marc Harrison. All meat products based on culturing cells and nutrients required to produce them, is this an issue concerning the production of cultured meat? Yeah, you know, all the ingredients necessary for them. Next, for Angus. Angus is online, if I'm not mistaken.
Angus, can you hear us? The question coming for you.
Okay. So maybe then...
I think he can hear us, so ask the question, please.
I'll ask the question. Congratulations for your presentation. Could feeding of human inedible byproducts of the feed industry, depending on the market situation, still be an opportunity to increase feed use efficiency? like evening out on protein surplus or legume, for example? And then, what do you all think of mega farms of pig and dairy? And that's all for the online.
Okay, so there's 3 questions online. Okay, so Anton, you were first.
Really not sure what I can say about cultured meat. If there's anybody here better placed, I mean, no, it's really not my.
Okay, we have a volunteer. Wolfgang is volunteering to also answer that. If you want to make a comment, Anton, please do, and then we'll hand to Wolfgang. You want Wolfgang? Okay, Wolfgang, off you go.
Go for. I'm happy to go for another question.
Good. Okay.
What can I say?
I cannot go very deep in this matter, but there is quite some excitement because I think somebody has published the fact that the European Union, not through its CAP policy, but through the Recovery and Resilience policy, is funding a project, I think, in the Netherlands on cultured meat, 2 million euros. And I think another project is in the pipeline about artificial or cultured mozzarella, I've read in the newspapers. So evidently it raises many questions about your métier, the research, and I think probably everybody will agree that you cannot dump research, even on cultured meat, because if you just look at and I think that brings us back to this basic question, sustainable food systems. Do we want sustainable food systems where we only look at the ecological footprint? If this is the only criteria, maybe cultured meat is the right thing to do. But if we want livelihood in landscapes, if we want to have biodiversity, if we want to keep our model of society, and we can permit it to have like this because we are not at the edge of the climate change, then I think this is the questions which we have to see. And at one point in time, evidently, the question also arises about societal demands. Is there demand for this kind of food? And at the end, I think, still also, we have to discuss the question about human health of what we are doing in terms of new food. There is a lot of processing in new food. Is this equally safe and healthy for society than our traditional primary products, which are very closely scrutinized as regards their health? You know the discussion on the red meat and the relationship with cancer. So I would evidently also expect that all other categories of food meet the same safety requirements for human health as it does our food.
Thank you for that, Wolfgang. And you wish to make a comment? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I decided to be a bit provocative today because provocation makes people thinking, which is never bad. So I would like to say that the tragedy of our Western culture is reductionism. You know, and reductionist or analytical approaches in science were very efficient the 18th, 19th century for understanding simple process, but they are totally unable to develop sustainable systems by taking it into account a high number of factors. You know, they are by definition not holistic, and we need holistic approach to solve our problems. And of course, analytical approaches can still be very useful to feed the thinking, the holistic thinking. But beyond that, it's our culture, our way of thinking in medicine, in agronomy, in silviculture, everywhere. We have this, this weakness of the reductionism. And so we should stop thinking to cause, as methane emitters, for instance. A cow is much more than that. And culture meat is typically an example of a reductionist approach.
Okay, thank you, Elaine, for that. So, Angus, did you hear the question that you were asked?
Yes, I think if I'm right, the question was as to whether we would consider using byproducts from the human food chain in our production system.
That's right.
Correct. I would say yes, it probably isn't representative for our system. I would always say that if there is food byproducts available, then I would be directing them to the monogastric section, simply because they're just better, they're more efficient at using it. So yeah, probably not for us, but I will almost certainly say there is a case, you know, the human byproducts foods has to be used in animal production. It's the best way for them, but definitely pigs and poultry would be my thoughts, rather as ruminants.
Okay, thank you for that. And Anna, can you remind me what the third question was? The question for everybody, but we won't.
Mega farms.
Yeah.
Mega farms, yes. Wolfgang, you talked about mega farms in your speech, so we might let you start.
Go for somebody else for voluntary.
Who wishes to, take up that question on the role or your views on mega farms in relation to pig production or dairy production? Sandrine, thank you.
Yes, I think a mega farm could be good for environment, but I agree that there is no acceptance for it on the field, and it's part of our challenge for the future. So it could be efficient. It could provide money for the farmers to invest in very good technologies to reduce the emission to the environment. And as I said before, it is correlated to an area which deal for the quantity of slurry, so it is adapted to the environment. But still, I think it will be more and more complicated to have such farms. Perhaps we have to explain more, but because of animal welfare too, the size of the pig unit is expected to be lower than.
Yeah. So in your study, and I'll go to some of the other panelists in a second, but in your study, did you look at where the optimum was, or where you started to lose the benefits of economy of scale? Even just looking at the environmental footprint and the economics, like presumably you do lose those benefits at some stage as you increase the size of a farm.
Yeah. Yes.
And did you look at that, or do you have any information for us on, going from small, extensive to moderate, intensive to mega farm?
In terms of economic?
And environmental footprint.
In terms of environment, yes, we have a good correlation with an LCA perspective because we measure the efficiency, and because in bigger system we have more efficiency. This is the reason why it's better.
Yeah, but I know the point I was trying to get at was that, in a moderately sized enterprise, you need a certain footprint for distribution of your animal manures. If you go to a mega enterprise, you need a much bigger footprint, so that the cost and the difficulty of distributing the animal manures becomes, probably a negative or an inhibitory factor. So I'm just wondering, did you know where that point of inflection is?
This is where comes the question of the territory, of course, because we have to adapt the size and the number of farms to the territory. So we have to have a territorial management that we don't have at the moment.
Okay.
But I think it's another question, because if we want to weight all from the size of the farm, I think it's a way to reduce the possibilities of evolution for the future. Because in increasing the size of the farm, we could access to more technology, as I said before, and it could be good for the environment, but we have to have a territorial management.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if we don't have, there will be environmental consequences. Of course, I agree with that.
Okay, listen, we have lots of people wishing to speak on this, so I'm going to let Anton, Mark, Wolfgang, and then back to this gentleman in the room here. Briefly, Anton, and...
No, just a brief talk about these conceptual processes indeed, like what is a mega farm, because you put them on the spectrum, right? You say, okay, that's de facto bad sustainability, and then we throw these things on the screen saying extensive, de facto good, you don't need to care about anything else. Or organic, do we talk about the number of byproducts used there? It doesn't seem to matter, right? So in that sense, I hope we always able to take that science-based approach to it and be able to have that different models coexist. And I think as a feed industry, we will adapt. If I can say something about feed manufacturing, that we do see the tendencies going, and indeed, if it moves away from bigger, it moves away from, let's say, it moves towards using more feed from the farm itself. We will adapt with complementary feed. So in that sense, we will adapt to the changes.
Okay. Mark?
Well, no, I just wanted to add, I mean, initially you would think a mega farm is more of the same, but if you would think of it, that it actually would broaden its business scope. It actually can cover a part of the industry structure that is being asked to move sustainability into a value proposition and get good economics below. I mean, in a mega farm that incorporates a multitude of aligned and integrated business operations, you don't have the immediate issue of being perfect, getting price benchmarking, having small markets, etc. You look at the end point. Look at how Tesla is moving forward in that sector. It's basically integrating from start till end its business processes and learns while going and is agile. And at the end only needs to report the financial endpoint. And I think if you think about mega farms, the only space that I would see for them is actually that they would move from being more of the same towards an integrated business concept.
Okay. Wolfgang?
No, just consideration. I think the efficiency of mega farms that Sandrine has referred to, that depends also on the input and where they would like to put the output. I mean, if I refer to this 20,000 milk cow project in a member state. I mean, if the business model is that the feeding stuff comes from overseas and it's exported to China, this is a mega farm, but is this what you would consider to be efficient?
Exactly. This is the
Thank you. Okay, this gentleman from the JRC down here wishes to comment on this, and then we'll go to a question. Just a brief comment now, please.
Very brief. The efficiency based on energy, there are tiers, there are boundaries, and when we consider the very little one, only the farm, of course, there can be an effect to the environment, but the boundary can be also considering the carbon sequestration in the soil. For example, in dairy farms, we have often hedges, etc., and they are sequestering energy into the soil, which is not considered. So I'm advocating again, particularly in this aspect of efficiency, to consider a balance approach, a carbon balance approach, and not only the life cycle, which considers only one side. And then there's the question of this tier of the boundaries, whether we consider a territorial approach or only a farm approach. And then efficiency can also look very different. So I'm in particular on this aspect of efficiency. I don't think that this view of the life cycle analysis is appropriate.
Okay. Any of our virtual panel members wish to comment on this question of mega farms? Tom, would it suit you to be taking all your slurry from one big mega pig farm versus taking it from, a number of farms?
I would be against having all these mega farms because I'm a huge supporter of the family farm, and we have to just take. There's our whole life, and family farming is more than just mega farms. We need, a lot of viable units support our economy, and it's trying to get a balance. That's the challenge.
Okay, thank you for that. Could I just say to our panel members, if you do wish to intervene at any stage, just take your microphone off mute and hopefully I'll see that and know when to bring you in. Question here in the room now.
Yeah, from Wilhelm INRA, France. INRA, France. I want to come back to the issue of numbers and facts and holistic approach. Because if we ask, what is the efficiency of livestock production? 20, 30, 40%? You say it can be more than 100. So which number are we going to take? And all these numbers are being used and abused to make a point. And coming back to your point of holistic approach, I fully agree with that. But people make different choices about what is important, environment, society. So what space do we want to leave to countries, users, Europe, to make decisions, including mega farms? So what is this, the room that we leave for diversity of opinions? And because there's not one solution. And even the consumer and the citizens, they can be the same person, but they make different choices.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Just a comment on this. I think you are entirely right, because you know, we have now this task to develop a sustainable framework, a framework for sustainable food, a law framework for sustainable food, where you have permanently to choose what is more important: climate, environment, biodiversity, human health, animal welfare. All these elements are partly conflicting objectives. Now you have a food in your votre assiette. So, has it been traveling 1,000 kilometers or only 500? Has it been used pesticide or not? So, to decide all these parameters of what constitutes sustainable food is almost not possible. We can give some guidance, but many of these sustainability elements are even conflicting in itself, in fact. So it's a hugely complex issue.
And people make different choices based on that. For some economy, maybe the price of food may be more important than for others. And should we leave that room open? And to what extent?
But this is politics in the noble sense.
Anton, you wish to comment?
Just a quick comment, as I hear the different impact categories, as we call them, because I heard LCA being attacked twice in a sense. But look, I will acknowledge that LCA cannot capture everything. But if we see what we are working on with FIFAC, very much involved with the PEF, the Product Environmental Footprint, the PEF CR feed, it's really about defining the rules on how to measure the impact on 16 impact categories, which include all kind of elements, including the carbon footprint, but also the water depletion, the ecotoxicity, ozone depletion. So it does provide a lot of the palette of the impacts we were talking about. And of course, it is a bit product based, and I will have to see how it works in the food chain. I mean, talking about initiatives, I do know that it's supposed to be a sustainable food labeling framework up in arms in a few years. So how this all works with the different allocations between the animals, stages. It's going to be a challenge, but I wouldn't, let's say just a statement in defense of LCA in this sense.
Okay, thank you. So I promised to bring Marc in earlier and give him a chance just to give a few minutes of your reflections, Marc, on what you've heard here this morning, and I forgot, so I'm going to let you in now, and then I'm going to go back to the Annas for a question from our virtual audience.
Okay, thank you for that. I thought that this morning was very helpful because it put actually maybe in a somewhat scattered way elements forward. And what I'm just seeing also now coming from the questions, there's certain aspects actually that unless we tackle them from a value chain perspective, including society, by the way, appropriately, we don't progress, because what we're talking about is a value chain that only can work if at the end point there's an appropriate economics, and when society buys it and can afford it. And above all, the affording is very important, because I see a lot of experimentation happening on sustainability. Sustainability is being embraced by everybody if it comes together with cost saving. But as soon as there is a complexity, either cost or less convenience or whatsoever, there are hurdles to take. And somebody has to pay for that, and at the end, somehow it needs to be accommodated financially. Now, with a CAP, you can, of course, in the middle of the value chain put more money. You can create financial instruments that farmers actually believe in and tap into. But that's not by definition sustainable or scalable. And scalable, at the end, if you think about what the farm-to-fork strategy is talking about, implies somehow that the true cost of food starts to match actually the cost of the stuff in the value chain. And I think all the measures actually aim at reducing certain aspects that increase true cost. But in addition, you need a kind of communication style, business to business and business to consumer. I hear a lot of criticism on LCA, I understand that. I mean, there's a lot of space for improvement, but there's 3 types of communication in LCA. It's the actual measurements on a specific location at a specific moment in a really real-life situation. And then there is the procurement and the branding opportunity in the value chain, where actually what you could talk about could be different. You don't need to transfer the absolute numbers from LCA up to the end consumer. What you could do is actually think about a relative improvement. If you want to scale, every farmer needs to be able to participate. He may need to shift what he's producing. He may need to work differently, but he should participate because the global demand won't reduce. That will stay similar. So at the end, if you want people to participate, a local LCA benchmark, what does it mean if I do pig farming together with particular croppings, etc.? What does that give me as a benchmark LCA? And what does it mean for my neighbor? And what if I next year do 5% better? Would that allow me to start to enter in a procurement branding strategy? And is that recognized up to the retailer? This kind of stuff may be scalable, but then at the same time I hear biodiversity, animal welfare, all those elements are equally relevant. And then I think you have to pick your battles today, in 5 years and in 15 years. What today gets the emphasis is not necessarily what you revisit in 5 years or 15 years. So you should simplify, make it workable, get priorities in place, and take care that the relative weighting of those LCAs actually match what you want to steer. And that goes together with what society actually gets to hear through communication channels, because they hear that for years. This is not good, so they're prepared for demand. And you can shift demand while actually in the value chain it works. But if you don't support the appropriate flow of the participants, take care that, I mean, a few years thanks to the EU, we went through France for the protein crops, and there you see then silos where the equipment was the same. I'm 63, where my father's factory had the same kind of machine standing. So you think, my goodness, there's no margin, there's no innovation possible. So if you want to shift what happens in the value chain, you need to risk assess what happens there, why people participate or not participate, and ensure that. And that's a very complex process that needs a kind of governance that is not in place at the moment. And that's the point. It's evolutionary path, and we need to move all together, because you and I, we are a society, we're an employee, and we're on the stock market punishing particular companies if they move into sustainability. So in a nutshell, that was my feeling. I think this is a great effort, but the synthesis that we need to make is fundamental.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So I'll go back to Anna's for a question.
Yes, is the other Anna now. So you have a comment. We are not sure for if it's for Tom. It's coming from Giacomo. So Giacomo, say in the chat if we are wrong. So the speaker presented some examples, and he saw an Italian example that refers to a very restricted and particular area. So he thinks that we have to be careful before to arrive to a conclusion about profitability and food security. So it's more a comment. We are not. We don't remember which presentation was addressing this point. But perhaps it was Tom. But we had a question for Tom too about the regulations controlling the slurries, biosolids, and the status to prevent from controlling the use. to prevent her from pollution, air and water quality. And he has a question, I guess, is for DG Agri, about the legislative control impact on the future development of variable and animal system, how legislation can prevent this. And I have been asking to say that we have 64 people following us online.
And I think that's enough, maybe, Anna. We'll try and deal with those. Could you just be specific with the question for Tom? Is it, what are the regulations, or how does he comply with the regulations around?
Yes, but I think that there is behind a question for Wolfgang that will be interesting to respond.
Okay.
But first was for Tom, yes.
Tom first. So Tom, how do you manage to comply with all the regulations around the use of manures and biosolids?
Well, we have a farm nutrient plan first and foremost drawn up by Tagus. Michael McCarthy, our Tagus advisor there, draws that out at the start of the year. With regards to practical, making sure that there's no pollution, which is where it's on the ground, we are only applying slurries when the weather is dry, when the crops are vibrant and ready to uptake it. And we're only applying it to spring crops when the sun is shining and it's absorbed into the soil almost immediately. So we don't have runoff. It's quite different from other examples where you've seen people applying it onto grasslands and a lot of rain coming afterwards and it flowing off. I mean, that would be completely unacceptable. So we follow this very closely, and we apply what the plant requires. As I said earlier, the challenge for us is we need to get more research to find out. You know, you take pig slurry. It's about 18 units of nitrogen. It's got about 10 of phosphorus. Now, after a while, when your soils build up in fertility, you'll reach your phosphorus level, but that will mean you'll have to go back to artificial nitrogen. So the challenge here is to measure the phosphorus binds tightly in the soil. So if it's not going anywhere near a watercourse, we need to figure out, can we apply more organic materials, given that they're held within the soil and used by the plants. And cover crops on the back end of the year for spring crops, they'll absorb nutrients again and be ploughed back in. So there's a lot of various factors here at play. But, you know, I'm not saying for 1 minute that we don't need more research, because I've been doing this practically for the last virtually 50 years.
Okay, that's good. Could I just ask you a very quick supplementary question, Tom? With the increase in the price of fertilizers that's happening now, do you think you're going to have more difficulty in sourcing organic manures? Are your suppliers going to be looking for, more a payment from you for it? Are dairy farmers going to seek to retain the organic manures on their farm and use it as a replacement for fertilizer? How do you see that working out for you next year?
That's a very good question, and I was quite worried about this as we went into our planting season. So I increased our winter beans from 70 acres to about 120 acres. So, that's one mitigation factor. But I spoke to my suppliers of organic materials. They require me as much as anything, because they need me to sign the dotted line saying that I will take it and take it properly, and that we will apply it to the lands we say we'll apply it to. So because we've built up a good relationship, this will continue, but I do feel that there's a role here for the department and Tagus to set out where our nutrients are going before the start of the year, so that we have a clear pathway where we're at. Now, up to now, we share the cost of applying these fertilizers. It's expensive, but it's worth it. But it's an ongoing journey, and we're open to any suggestions that's out there, and that's why Tagus is providing a very leading role in this matter.
Okay, so the value of your trusted relationships obviously is going to be important to you in this year. You had a question for Wolfgang?
The other one was for
Yes.
Alan.
Yeah, the question about the Italian thing was for Alain. Sorry. So Giacomo was asking, was saying that he would like that we be very careful before to arrive to conclusions when we are talking about a very specific context. At the same time, he would like to add that he appreciates your presentation, okay? So it's adding...
Or he liked your presentation,
the
Elaine, but
question and the question for Wolfgang is that it was a follow-up of the previous one regarding legislation. So we thought that was a good point to make the link what Tom was answering. If DG agree, Wolfgang could comment on the legislative options, but don't worry if you don't.
I'm afraid I'm getting tired. I missed the question.
yeah, so what exactly is the question for Wolfgang?
It was the same. I mean, it was about the legislative controls and how they can impact the future development of arable and animal systems, the controls on the slurries, and so on. So.
No, the control is indeed quite a big concern, because on the one hand, we always argue and are under pressure to have simplification in the common agricultural policy, but we spend huge amounts, and we have had simple systems, but which were not targeted enough, I admit it. If you have purely area aids, it's very easy to check whether the area is there. If on this area you have 30 commitments, terms of pesticides, nitrates, animal welfare, and whatever, evidently it becomes much more difficult to control, and it might also imply additional burden for the farmers. Now, happily, we have delegated this to the member states, because in the new CAP, we are not interested anymore. We are still interested, but we are not in charge of doing on-the-spot controls on the farms in the future, because that will be the job of the member states. But still the issue remains that these public good requirements are, in terms of controls, much more demanding than pure area aid.
Okay, thank you. So we'll come back to the room for a question now, but I'm going to jump in with a question of my own, if that's allowed. And Wolfgang, unfortunately, it's for you again. We're going to have you tired before you leave, but you talked quite a lot in your presentation around protein supply and protein imports, and I suppose you talked about new proposals or new guidelines. I'm not quite sure the status of them from the Commission that have been developed recently. So my question really is protein supply for feed going to limit livestock production, do you think? We really depend on imports of protein, so are we going to see an impact of what you're trying to do in terms of deforestation on livestock production in the EU? And Anton may wish to comment also, and Mark possibly.
I think we have to see now how the new legislation will impact on feed imports. It might well be that imports from other parts of the world, like the United States, become easier, but at a higher price. So there might be eventually an impact on availability of feed. And the question that I'm interested in fact, because now we pretend that we are holistic in the Commission. But the question I ask myself indeed is, if I look now, everybody agrees that our livestock, in particular cattle, should use grassland, in fact, because that's the natural food for cattle. But if we keep the livestock which we have, does this not lead to overgrazing and thus, again, limit biodiversity? I mean, I remember very well when I was young, we had two times of mowing the grass, in fact. Now my cousin who has taken over, he's mowing it 5 times, 6 times. So what happens to biodiversity if we use our proper grassland, in fact? So wherever you look, there are just contradictions and challenges.
Okay, Anton, Mark, do you want to comment on that? The potential impact of availability of protein?
Well, maybe a comment that has been made already more often. there is a major issue with the ability to harvest sufficient protein from protein crops. And in cases the weather is not the issue, then diseases will be. And what I see now is that the kind of acreage projections for those crops, especially if they're not part of a co-production concept, are really not sufficient to allow the companies that would have the know-how to do something about it to do so. And so the only way how those crops can get improved is by transferable know-how and concerted public activities where you start really to build on the academic findings that exist, but now get actually appropriately put down in databases that offer starting points for the small SMEs that would like to work on those crops. And these things can be organized, but it is a full interplay in the value chain. It's a kind of predictive breeding workflow that you would install between academia and breeding companies, and then ultimately should also address the livestock needs, because you would like then also those protein crops simultaneously to have those functionalities that are appropriate for being used in feed. This is an opportunity. Europe could do that, and from a Plants of the Future perspective, I think we would very much like to see that happen.
Okay, Anton?
Yeah, so the topic of soy, it has been chasing me for the past 24 hours already. So it is deforestation proposal that's been taking up a lot of my time. But in a sense, we have been preparing for it, and maybe that's also the idea. I mean, the idea that we would phase out soy imports completely is a fallacy, and to get completely rid of soy coming from South America, I don't see it happening. But we definitely have an interest to keep supply chains open and support also sustainable soy production in these countries. So this is, when looking at the proposal, I have to read the full details still, but it is possible, let's say, for us to keep a competitive offer of feed prices, depending on the extent to which a physical connection needs to be present when you compare to the consignment of soy placed on the EU market and the traceability towards the farm. Current legislative proposal would propose full traceability, 100%, all the way geolocation, which for us in practice means segregated supply chains. And then we would have to, we have to exclude risk. We'd have to exclude complete zones. Yeah, then we're going to get hit with some price increases. Just to highlight that as FIFAC, as a soy supply chain sector, we have been preparing. We have our soy sourcing guidelines. We have defined a whole new concept called conversion-free soy. We actually go beyond just protecting deforestation. Because if you talk about protecting natural ecosystems, we know that if you talk about the Cerrado, it's not just forests, it's others, it's wetlands, it's highly biodiverse grasslands. So we have these solutions, but we would have to be allowed to use mass balance trading systems, just like they use in Renewable Energy Directive, by the way, for sustainable biofuels imports. So this is for us the key concern going forward. So and I've been talking a lot right now, but just on the soy element, also just think like we just get rid of soy, be soy free, and that's done. I mean, just don't forget about the nutritional profile, the amino acid profile, the digestibility. You replace it with rapeseed meal. Yeah, you have let's say digestible phosphorus levels that go increase when you hit certain ceilings. So it's all not that easy. We have a reason to kind of invest still in sustainable sourcing, I would say.
Okay. Okay, Angus, you wish to comment on this?
Yes, thank you. It was just going back to Wolfgang's comments on the overgrazing, and I think he's right. This is a real problem. What I'd like to say is that overgrazing in a planned grazing system is detrimental to production. So it's not something that we desire. You know, we're definitely, if we can educate ourselves about planned grazing systems, you know, we find currently that overgrazing reduces our production, reduces our performance. So, you know, this is why I think it's important that we have education systems around planned grazing systems.
Okay, thank you for that, Angus. So we have a question here at the back of the room. Suzanne, if you can bring the mic. Lady in white.
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm Monica Guarino Amato from REA, an Italian research council, and I have a question for everybody who wants to reply. You are talking about grassland, grass grazing, and everything that we cannot afford because we are facing desertification, and the climate change is arrived in Italy. We have tornadoes, we have hurricanes, and it's very difficult for the south part of the country to do everything in the right way because we don't have marginal land. We have mountains or sea. We don't have land, we don't have grazing. So maybe there are some errors that we made in the past, as everybody's. But this is a very big issue. And I think that the climate change and desertification is going up and is very, very scary. What do you think about this?
Oh, who wants to comment on that? Elaine?
Yes, I can try at least, but the agroecological approach to this problem is to develop a system that is more resilient by using crop species, possibly, yes, mainly species, also cultivars. But for instance, with regard to wheat, there are new, so recent cultivars that were produced in organic conditions. They were selected in organic conditions. They are taller, they have a more developed rooting system, and they can compete with weeds. That is a possibility instead of using the cultivars of the Green Revolution that are smaller with a small root system and so on. So, and for instance, instead of using raygrass in grassland, you can use lucerne and cocksfoot and so on. So there is a margin for adaptation. Then the objective should be to increase the soil organic matter by covering soils almost permanently on arable land with cover crops and also crops associated to the main crops within the main crop. And if you have this permanent cover and you reduce tillage also, so you reduce soil organic matter mineralization, so you can increase your soil organic matter, and so the water economy is better. So that's two ways of adapting. And you can also sequester more carbon, and this could be supported by the society. And also on the longer term, if you reduce tillage, which requires a lot of power and so a lot of fossil fuel consumption, and if you reduce synthetic nitrogen fertilization, you spare a lot of fossil fuel too, and you replace that by biologically nitrogen fixation, by legumes. You can reduce very much the impact of agriculture on climate change. So you can adapt and you can...
Who pays for this?
But adaptation doesn't cost, it's profitable. No, the even reduced tillage system or no-till system are also more profitable. That has been demonstrated for a long time. And cost reduction policy can pay too. Maybe you should not cease all the use of nitrogen fertilizer in 1 year, but you can reduce progressively when you restore soil fertility by the techniques I mentioned. This is also profitable. But carbon sequestration could be supported by companies and by public authorities. Yes.
Could I ask you, what's your thinking locally? Where do you, yourselves as the people living and the experts in that region, think your agricultural system is going to go?
I think that the problem is not a technique problem. We know, they know how to do. The problem is that I think that all the discussion that is going around Europe is for, I'm sorry, this is a provocation, but it's not for the Mediterranean part of the European Union. It's very, very focused on something that sometimes we cannot do. And it's not just only a question of money that people have to pay. It's just something that is not possible to do it. I know that there are a lot of solutions, technical solutions, but we have to incentive the technical solution. We have to form people, understand what to do. It's not enough to say what to do, I think.
Okay, thank you for that. So maybe certainly the Animal Task Force will have to make sure that we are representing all the regions of Europe in terms of... Yeah.
May I add something to this? Because
Of course, I know perfectly. It was not a critique, it was just a provocation.
No, it's a good comment though. So, Martin, did you want to come in on this topic or was it a different question?
It's a different question, but it links up to this topic.
Okay.
Actually, today the seminar is about crops and animals together to address food and nutrition security. And actually, I was quite interested by a comment that Wolfgang Butcher made this morning, where he said it's quite essential that you look for the regional dimension in that. The interaction of the crop, the plant system and the animal system, the really benefit of it is when you have a customized approach to the region, although that's how I interpreted the comment that Wolfgang made. So here we see another plea, and I'm really very pleased that this thing is coming up, because normally we think about the role of livestock in the future food system. Yeah, the future food system is colorful with all kind of regions. So I want to ask the panel for the opinion. When you take this up and you think about the presentation you give, what does that mean? Where do you see the opportunities to arrange such a regional approach?
Thank you, Martin. Who wants to, and the panel wishes to take up that? Mark, you had your hand up to make a comment on the previous, so maybe you might try to address Martin's comments also.
Thank you again. Well, to go first to your comment in support of that, the issue that I see, I mean, things like talking about sustainability, we're talking about multi-year efforts to actually make the financial story sound. And what is now happening with this extreme weather volatility is that on a 10 years time period, certain farmers, because of where they live actually, don't earn at all enough during 1 or 2 seasons in a 10-year span. And then the question is, how do you survive as a farmer? And I think this is something that we really have to look into, because farming is not an annual business. It's growing your fields and nurturing your farm to get it sustainable. And so this is, I think, a main issue that needs to be addressed for future, because insurances by themselves don't cover this. But then to go back to your point, I'm a very big fan of project Hestia that is developed by Oxford University, where they are mapping down in LCM matrices from something like 40,000 farms globally spread their actually environmental impacts on a large run of indicators. And what you see is that they can go today already beyond the FAO data. So rather than that you actually look at large areas, they can zoom in already in particular areas. And then, of course, the question is what business runs there? And I think this is the learning phase that we are entering. We should understand what is the environmental footprint linked to doing things in a particular way and running it in addition at a particular location surrounded by other business activities, because that's actually where the synergy runs. And the key problem that I see is that if you think of something that is better, then you're there sitting with individual entrepreneurs, possibly, all of them wanting their stake today, and not having the grace period to learn and find this new workable business model where together they can go through the same door. And I think this is the key issue. I don't know whether that answers your question partially, but I think this is a hurdle to take. We need to experiment with business models to make this work.
Well, anybody else wish to comment on Martin's question? How did you consider sort of regional optimization when you were approaching this session this morning? Did you consider regional optimization? Sophie?
It's perhaps a little comment, but I think what is missing is a manager of territorial scale, because we have farmers and we try to put all the decision to the farmers, but we see that we have territorial challenges. So perhaps it's a new job, perhaps it's an interesting new job for the future to manage the territory.
I would guess Wolfgang would say the CAP strategic plans should play an important role here. Wolfgang?
Yeah, the CAP strategic plans, they should do everything. But I'm not sure that they will address it. But I completely agree with the two previous speakers that everything burns down today to governance issues, in fact. Because we have many good ideas on all levels, but at the end it is how to organize our societies. And here again, this is one key issue. As you have said, the value chain, yeah, we have to work together, but who does it, who steers it? And here is again the same discussion.
Okay, we'll go to another question in the audience and then we'll go back to the virtual audience. So Jean-Charles?
It's not really a question, it's more a comment to try and bring a new, well, not necessarily new, but we heard from the practical experience from farmers here. One dimension that we didn't hear too much so far is the issue of resilience also. And another dimension that it's about diversity. We heard about Italy, etc. So the territorial approach, but we have a lot of diversity in the territories in the production system in the EU. And it's a bit risky, the comparison that I will do now between biodiversity and resilience of the systems is diversity of the production systems on the sizes of farms and the resilience of these. And I come to your comment, Frank, that you made, or the question to say, the economy of scale. Is it a level where at the end of the day you lose the economy and you lose the resilience? I agree that the value chain is very important, but I think there are also other dimensions that we need to keep in mind.
And when you talk about resilience, do you mean economic resilience for the farmer? Do you mean kind of ecological resilience of the system, or both?
I think mostly of the dimension that we didn't touch too much. We heard a lot about the environment dimension of sustainability. I think about the socioeconomic aspects. So the resilience to, well, we heard about the question of food security for Europe in the future, contingency plans, etc., restricting, for instance, deforestation. We need to look into this. And I instinctively, but I don't know if anybody can confirm or reject the idea, that this issue of crop animals farming, cycling the systems, the mixed farming, instinctively I would tend to say that this is probably a bit more resilient and specialized systems. But I don't know if this is really known, and it depends on a number of factors, I guess.
Okay, I see Jean-Louis wants to comment on this, so we'll give him the floor.
No. More than system, it's regional. And the problem, one of the major problems we have in Europe is the specialization of the region. And in some case, because we have economy of scale, but also economy of agglomeration. And the problem in Europe today is probably not we have too much livestock. We have too much livestock in some area and not enough in other area. On the mean at European level, we are more or less 1 livestock unit per hectare of agricultural land. It's not so bad. The problem is 5 or 10 in one place and 0 in other place. And the question is, can we imagine in the future to relocate some livestock, and in an intermediate phase, can we imagine, for example, for very intensive region producing livestock in Brittany, some place in Netherlands, in Germany, and so on, can we imagine a huge innovative breakthrough about the management of manure? And to serve some crop farmers somewhere in another part of the country or in the same region, perhaps, I don't know.
Okay. So, Alain, I'll give you a brief comment on this, and then have you any more questions from the virtual audience that you wish to put? Then we'll go back to that. But Alain, you wish to...
Yes, first on the resilience of farms in relation to their size and the profitability of this farm. There has been very interesting studies comparing the large farms of East Germany to the medium size of West Germany. And I can send you the reference if you wish. And the studies demonstrated that the medium size farms of West Germany are much more agile, more flexible, diversified, and more productive, create more jobs per hectare than the large ones. And that was quite very clear, and there is probably a ghost curve, you know, between the size of the farm and the profitability and the resilience. But the main economic resilience for me is related to the volatility of prices on the global market. And there is a trend of decrease of product price in general, and an increasing volatility. And both aspects are very dangerous for the persistence of farms. And this is one of the reasons of the very fast decline of farmers' population.
If I could hold you there, Alain, because I do want to get in another question. We've only 5 minutes left.
Yes, but just one...
Very briefly, so.
One solution. Well, the solution is to escape from the agro-food chain and process your products whenever possible and to sell them in short and local marketing chains. And the good news is that citizens want to buy more and more local products, so there are many possibilities to do that.
Okay. Anton, you said a tiny contribution.
Tiny, I'll keep it very short now. Just the topic of resilience speaks to my mind as well, because if we look at our sustainability charter, it's the 5th ambition, so we won't ignore it in our overall perspective. But if I speak about it at EU level, because look at the individual national charters for what goes on at national level, but we really see that if we talk about protein supply in the future, it's been mentioned, and the topic of NGTs for us is an inevitable part here as well. I would say, okay, if we want resilient, competitive protein production, crop production in Europe, we have to start this debate. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Okay, thank you.
Little time to discuss.
So Anna, a question that can be answered in 3 minutes.
Not possible. So, what are the best proven farming methods to increase biodiversity? Current methods that are applied in the past years haven't been able to stop the biodiversity decline. And picking up on all this discussion on territorial issues, because biodiversity is different in all these issues. Also, why does cow milk or poultry chicken are cheaper than vegetable drinks or tomatoes or apples for that matter? How do we came to this crazy situation? Comments?
Well, you could add to that, how do we come to the crazy situation that a bottle of water is more expensive than a bottle of milk. So anyway, who wishes to try to take up that question on the practices to improve biodiversity? No takers for that. Wolfgang?
I think that brings us back to the point that I have made, that we are not extremely strong in being able to quantify the impact of our measures. And there are two issues. The first thing is, in many of our analyses, we should start with a non-action scenario. What would happen to biodiversity if we would not have a common agricultural policy? So agricultural policy would just be guided by the legal framework without incentives. And then my guess is it would be even worse. So I think that's already the starting point. But even for this one, you need quite some good evidence. Then it comes really to the question on all these biodiversity measures. As I said, we have now a challenge, because in the Common Agricultural Policy, you have the direct payments, which in future will have the eco-scheme payments, we have the agro-environmental payments, we have the compensatory allowance for mountain areas, we have investment aid. And we are supposed to contribute with this expenditure to biodiversity. So you go now through these funding tools. How much does our 50 billion budget a year for direct payments contribute to biodiversity? If I listen to you, you all tell me grassland is for biodiversity, is good for biodiversity. So I could argue even the direct payments, who everybody hates, at least those who do not like the CAP, I could say, listen guys, but I have evidence, also not quantified, I just refer to your slides here, grassland is biodiverse. So even the direct payments are contributing to biodiversity. Nobody will accept it, I tell you immediately. So we need to be much more sophisticated together, and also to have research and methodologies. How do we assess biodiversity? I give you the example. I'm convinced that the payment to mountain areas, the compensatory allowance, provides biodiversity, or is contributing to biodiversity. I'm convinced, not because I'm a researcher, but because I'm walking in the months of June in the mountain areas. And I see the difference in number of flowers and variety of flowers in those areas where animals were grazing compared to those areas where nothing happens. So maybe this is the wrong example. So evidently we have already to discuss what is biodiversity. So then I started to Google biodiversity, mountain farming. I tell you, hundreds and thousands of publications. One looks at the bumblebees, the other one looks at the grasshoppers, the third one on the farm bird, the fourth one on the other birds. And so what shall I do now with this? In terms of proving that I have an expenditure that contributes to biodiversity, at least partly. I mean, we will never pretend how to do it. But so I think we need to get better in assessing the contribution of our policies to all these elements, and it's the same for environment, for climate, for all the policies. And I know it's difficult, because if you say to colleagues, they say, oh, but it's complex and everything depends on, but I just showed it to Professor Peters. Those who do not like our policies, they are very quick with their assessments. I just give you a flavor here from no, I do not quote it. The message was the greenhouse gas emissions from European livestock is bigger than from the cars in Europe. So, do you believe this in a life cycle assessment?
I think you could look. Single figures like that are very easy to take out and to throw out. we saw Alain's, and I think it was you or somebody else said the number of livestock in Europe has actually declined over the last 50 years, but has the number of cars changed over that time? Obviously it has. So look, there's loads of ways of looking, I suppose, at contributions of agriculture and other sectors. I think it's not simple. That's the comment I would make. Did you want to wrap up, Wolfgang, that comment?
Yeah.
You're finished? Okay, listen, I think we will wrap up the session now. Thank you very much for a very lively and interesting panel discussion, and I'd like to thank all the speakers for their contributions this morning.